everyone. Back at it again. It's another edition of the State of Football, part 38. All right, seeing a place to be here at the Jersey Shore. I'm so pumped up because we have a special guest appearance, not just this Tuesday, but every Tuesday, counting you down throughout the NFL season. He is Russel Lande. We will welcome him into the show in just a minute. Of course, we have my co-host each and every morning, John Murphy, down in New Orleans, recovering, putting the bandages over the wounds down there in New Orleans with the Raiders beatdown last night. And oh, by the way, just when you thought I was out with the NFL picks, I come right back in, and we both go 13-3 on the week on the prediction front. So John inched me by a game last week. You are now 25-7 for the season, I believe, and I am 24-8. So I am one game behind John on the season predictions. Of course, we're going to dive into that Monday Night Football game, but like I said, we have Russel Lande of the Calgary Stampeders, and of course, Infectious Scouting, GM Jr., and now a weekly spot here on the State of Football. So we welcome Russ into the show. I'll start it off with you today, brother. Those Las Vegas Raiders, very jubilant, a lot of excitement, and you were just saying right before we hopped on the other coaching staff is already back in the building.
Yeah, they're already back there. They're excited to watch the film. They dove right in. I mean, I think you just got to give all the credit to, truthfully, I mean, the team played well, but how about that offensive line coach? How about those backup offensive linemen? Trent Brown out, Incognito hurt. And what do? They come in and they literally dominated New Orleans up front. I mean, they just ran the ball and ran the ball and ran the ball no matter who got it. They crushed them. It was a great job by that O-line. You have to be excited about the future if you're the Raiders because a lot of their draft picks, like Ruggs and Edwards, they may have contributed a little bit. They didn't make a big impact. How good is this team going to be the second half of the season? When these guys get their legs under them, get used to the NFL, that team's got a really bright future there.
Yeah, and I think the key thing is, you might not love what the Raiders have done in the draft under Mayock and Gruden, but, they clearly had a plan in terms of the type of player that they're looking for. And they may have reached and overdrafted some players in spots, John, but at the end of the day, like Russ said, I'm thinking, oh, man, that offensive line, Brown is out. You see Incognito on the sideline. Doesn't look like he's returning to the game. The Raiders down by a pair of scores. You're saying, oh, man, maybe the Raiders are in for a long night, but they keep chipping away. And then you see them pull away in the second half. Kudos to that team and an underrated team, I thought, coming into the year. Of course, my Super Bowl prediction off to a pretty good start.
Yeah, and usually, it doesn't matter what night it would be played on. If you come out the next day and you're talking about a team that has double-digit penalties for close to 150 yards, that's normally the Raiders. So I think, staying on the right side of the penalty situation. The other thing I liked is, yeah, they've drafted the guys that they wanted or that they liked. But then last night, early in the game, when it's not working, having the ability to have your D coordinator then be smart enough to say, hey, you know what? This is a rookie guy that's on the outside. He's getting picked on after what people saw week one. I'm going to make a change temporarily, put in a different look, give him a different guy, instead of just sitting there and letting your guy get roasted, I think is another thing, to show that coaching staff, has enough confidence in themselves and what they're doing, really not to be bothered by the outside noise. And then we mentioned it, about how some of the teams were playing and finishing games. I like the factor that Gruden, even with his guys, knowing that Jacobs, was nowhere near at 100%, it likely was either cramping or some leg-related injury, that had him going in and out of the game. And you're down some of your best guys, and you don't want to give them any chance to come back. Because if you would have given the Saints the momentum to come back, tie the game possibly, then you're probably losing it, in overtime to the better team overall. To go out there and kick a 50-plus yard field goal with Dan Carlson, who, has had his struggles early in his career, and that's exactly how the Raiders got him off, waiver wires after – missing, enormous amount of kicks for Minnesota. To go out there and kick a 50-plus yarder to win the game rather than just run a fourth down play or hope to take some time off the clock with a punt and give the ball back to Drew Brees. I think that's another really good, sharp move, there to go out there and win the game, to put, the ball in the hands of your playmakers that you have invested in and that you really believe in. And one of the main reasons to go after a young kid like Carlson is that big leg that he had shown in college, and he, all the right things happened, when you look at it last night. They didn't have the weapons. Ruggs wasn't really making a big impact, and then he draws a big penalty. They kept Joe in the check down to Waller, and it worked. Nobody who the Saints had, was on him. Malcolm Jenkins was at least socially distancing when it came to pass coverage. So they were doing a lot of the right things yesterday that you haven't seen in past years. And I agree with Russ. You have to really like the idea, and we mentioned it yesterday. You really have to now believe, with or without whatever the Chiefs will do, one of the Raiders or the Chargers have a real shot, to get into the playoffs. And then we'll see what happens. An upset over Mahomes, I'm not saying that would have happened yesterday, per se. But if you play them like they did the Saints and you play a lot of keep away, the one thing that O-line is, it's not good looking at all. Please, none of them ever take your shirt off in front of me. But what they can do is they can run block their big asses off. So I think that's the one thing you saw. And that's something you really have to like, is that even when you don't have your best guys, if you can just still keep your formula to what you think you do well, it shows you have a better chance of winning that way than trying to change everything because you're missing a few pieces or some guys are hurt. The Raiders in the COVID era of playing NFL games, I think you have to be excited that this might not be a fluke, that they're 2-0 and they have a legitimate shot to be a playoff contender now.
I got laughed at by the chat room when I announced the Raiders as my Super Bowl prediction. It only took 2 weeks to get the panel on board with me. But Russ, I take a look at the kind of the X factors that they do have in place here, because, John mentioned the kicker, the field goal, the special teams in the NFL has been atrocious this year. And that kicker, he was special teams player of the week last week. He had like a 54-yarder. Comes out this week, shows how valuable he is. And, oh, by the way, they've got Marcus Mariota there stashed on the bench, a valuable backup quarterback, which could come in handy in this COVID season. And then, oh, by the way, Darren Waller. And they got a head coach that the team is believing in and buying into. Okay? You can say that about other coaches around the league, but you can see it with the Raiders, the jubilance in the locker room, the embracing of Mayock and Gruden on the field after the game. There's something special brewing in Las Vegas. Oh, by the way, they've got the home field advantage with this new Death Star. And then Gruden comes out after the game, and again, Russ says, Travis Kelce, George Kittle. Wait, no, give me Darren Waller.
No, I mean, I think you have to look at that team, and you look at not only the talent that they've put together, but I think also the way in which their offense is willing to adjust. I mean, early on, they threw the ball, and they said, you know what, it's not going as planned. The car was sort of sitting back there, taking a little bit too long sometimes, making some things happen. They started running the ball. They started controlling the line of scrimmage, and all of a sudden, Carr started playing better. The whole offense did things better. I think Gruden is willing to adjust. He's obviously a guy that loves to throw it, wants to throw it. Every year he's been a head coach pretty much. His team has led the league in passing attempts. But last night they said it's not working perfectly. We're going to run it. So I'm excited by what they're doing. I think they have a lot of good things going on there on the field. And I think as long as Gruden's making the decisions and sort of putting that team together, they have a chance to really get better and better. And I think, I don't know about Super Bowl, but I think they have a chance to be a playoff team. I think right now you have to consider them really right there at below the Chiefs as the best team in the division.
Well, hold that thought. Russell will be back next Tuesday after they put a beat down on those New England Patriots week 3 to go up 3-0. Derek Carr suddenly the modern day Brad Johnson over here with Coach Gruden. And, I think this is their third season entering this kind of forced marriage together. And it call me crazy. It just might work. All right. The state of football, Rick Serritella, John Murphy, Russel Lande breaking it down here. We're going to get into some of the NFL draft risers and sliders. Of course, we have Scouting the Nation, new article up on the NFLDraftBible.com with all our latest draft buzz. We'll dig into some of the matchups that these two guys are keeping an eye on. Obviously, John being the VP of player personnel up in Toronto and Russ being a scout in Calgary, these guys are still working. They're still monitoring the prospects. They're still doing the due diligence. Maybe a little less travel. Same boat here with the NFLPA Collegiate Bowl. But we are still, tracking prospects. So we'll have some key matchups for you. But I want to dive into some of the injuries because this has been a common denominator around the league. We didn't get a chance to dive into it on yesterday's show too much. John, I'll start off with you. We mentioned the list of names, Jimmy Garoppolo, Devontae Adams, Nick Bosa, the list goes on and on, Saquon Barkley. I mean, which team here, I guess the team clearly reeling from the injuries is the 49ers, right? They put an investigation, hey, we want that turf in Jersey tested over there. But which single injury, I guess, is the question, is the most damaging or leaving an impact here and the NFL team kind of in their hands crying this morning?
Well, I mean, I think, when you look at the injuries, you then have to look at what were you expecting from those clubs, right? It's heartbreaking if the face of your franchise, in McCaffrey and Barkley one's going to miss possibly, up to half of the season, the other guy out for the year. However, the Giants weren't going to win with him, and they're not going to win without him. I think the stuff with McCaffrey is, it's hurting them because there was a process there to start seeing a little bit by time he's back. You were hoping the offense was starting to gel there, right? You knew they were going young on defense with the Panthers, but, you had some hope with more McCaffrey and Bridgewater. They would have some chemistry at some point offensively, for the Panthers. So I think you have to say Bosa, and then you double down, basically, seconds after you lose Bosa, to lose Solomon Thomas. And then I think if you come out as the Niners and you make that type of response after the game, right? It's never easy to see, something like that happen. And when I was in Calgary, we had it happen where, our left tackle got injured on a drive. They back him up. I'm inside waiting to hear what the doctor says. I hear the medical cart, the sound of it backing up. And who are they bringing in? The right tackle right behind him. 3 plays later, he gets cut blocked from behind, and the two starting tackles are laying next to each other, in there. So, yeah, it's easy to resort to looking at the turf, wondering who you did wrong the week before, and when karma decided to visit you, and pay that much attention to you in one game. However, you now have George Kittle coming back. You're playing on that same turf. So have you already given George Kittle or others the chance to now point the factor that should you or should you not rush Kittle back to play with the backup quarterback against the Giants on the same turf next week, right? So now you already are in the heads of your guys, by saying that. But I think losing both of those two guys, and that's where they really made their money. And now you're down multiple D linemen, traded DeForest Buckner, so you have a rookie in for him, down Sherman at least for a few more weeks, probably Garoppolo for at least 2 or 3 out of those 4 weeks that they're mentioning. You're down a lot of different guys there, and I think when you're in that division where you clearly have seen the Cardinals seem at least real, they're going to be ultra competitive with how they're doing things and how they're playing. Seattle might be the best team in the division at the moment, pound for pound. And the Rams have found a little bit of that McVay magic, is starting to come back. They're calling the game differently. You finally saw Henderson have his first real productive NFL game. And they have Aaron Donald, who's the best defensive player in the division, if not the league. Minus that, you're not going to get Deion Jordan and Ziggy Ansah are not going to replace what you lost with Bosa. So to me, the Niners, who had the highest expectation of these teams that lost multiple guys, they might be in for it in terms of it may be now, not a stretch, but it will be a lot harder for them to make the playoffs in that division without, unfortunately, some of those injuries evening out amongst the rest of the division.
Well, I'll say kudos to Javon Kinlaw, because that was one guy who did step in and played very well. And, it's funny because I think now the last 3 or 4 years in a row, the NFC team that gets to the Super Bowl has failed to make the playoffs the following year. I forget if it's 3 or 4 years, but I think that trend is on pace to continue here, because it seems like anybody who plays in this new Giants MetLife Stadium just encounters bad luck. If you're the Giants, the Jets, the 49ers, who, oh, by the way, took a trip down to West Virginia to practice down there, rather than flying back out west. Over to Russ for the injury report. The one silver lining in the injuries this week, Russ, I thought, and I hate to say the good thing that came out of it, unfortunately, we feel bad for Tyrod Taylor. I'm glad that he's okay. But the silver lining was this kid, Justin Herbert. We talked about it on yesterday's show. Kid finds out on the way to the game, basically, hey, you're getting the start. And, I thought he did very well. Now, Coach Lynn has come out and said, hey, no, not so fast. Tyrod Taylor's still the starter. But I have to imagine that cannot last very long.
Yeah, firstly, as a team, they have to be pretty excited. They took the Chiefs to overtime with a backup quarterback, with their best offensive lineman announced before, a day or two before the game that he's out for the season. And Derwin James, their second best defensive player, is missing the whole season. So you have to be sort of excited. I think part of what they're doing with Herbert is you saw while he played well, that one big play at the end of the third quarter really was probably the reason they lost the game. He's literally 2 yards from running for a first down, and instead of just running the 2 yards, he heaves it down the field. It gets intercepted. If they just keep driving, score a touchdown or even a field goal, that might have been enough to end the game. But I think they want to slow the process down for the kid. No reason to rush him. But I think you have to be very excited if you're a Chargers person about his future based on what you saw, even though that offensive line is brutal, to say the least. But how about the fact that we talk about the 49ers, obviously devastating. It puts their whole season in question. You lose not only Bosa, but lose Thomas, who's not a great player, but he's a solid, workmanlike, competitive defensive end. Now you're playing 2 guys right off the street, basically. I just don't see how they're going to be able to provide the same rush. Kinlaw, thank goodness they drafted him. They didn't have him and had gone a different way in the first round, they would be in dire straits. But to me, if you look across, look at the Giants. You're talking about their injuries. This is going to really force that team to find some other weapons. You're going to see next year when Barkley comes back, they'll probably have found another tailback who could be a good complementary player. They're going to find out which of their receivers really are guys for the long term. And it's going to give Jones really a year to learn how to be the guy in that offense, because he's not going to be able to rely on Barkley. They're going to throw the ball a lot more now that Barkley is injured. I think you're going to see Jones really develop this year in a year that really no one thought the Giants had any chance of winning anyway. So you're going to get a real benefit from Jones having to be the man now instead of being able to hand it off so much.
Yeah, and I'm just scrolling through these injuries. The 49ers, man, you talk about Garoppolo and Bosa and Thomas. Oh, by the way, Raheem Mostert, the tight end. The receivers are all banged up. It is looking like a doom and gloom season for Kyle Shanahan, who I still believe is a great young mind, and will still keep them in the mix despite all the injuries. The other team, quickly here, I think, and the quarterback there for Denver, he did very well for himself. But, you take a look at Derek Locke's out, Cortland Sutton is out, and now suddenly, Vic Fangio, another guy that's just run into some bad luck, doesn't. John, you got me laughing in the chat room, man. We're back at it again. The state of football here, breaking it down. I can't keep my composure. It only took 38 episodes for me to break it down. But Samantha, if you're listening, since you're not getting my message in the chat room, some more coffee, please. The kid needs caffeine over here.
I don't know if that's a wise choice, but
but I think that, the NFL we've pretty much covered thoroughly between yesterday and today. I do want to dig in to some of the college football action. And there's another game coming up on Thursday night. But you look around the league, we put out some draft news and notes before we get into our key matchups. John, who are some guys that are kind of moving and shaking on the draft board from this past weekend?
Well, I think one of the interesting ones is, we saw LSU and others, Ohio State most notably, starting to get some of their guys once they said they were playing to opt back in. And now we're hearing, it's going to be interesting to see, do they let everybody who did their business, in terms of behind the scenes, who has signed officially with an agent, who hasn't, what have they gotten, and then what the rules, and regulations for this year is going to be. But one of the guys that is still kind of sitting on the fence, and it better be a pretty damn sturdy fence, is Telvin Shelvin from LSU, because, behind the scenes, the people around him are very wondering if he just sits around and works out, doesn't play, and isn't in, with the team environment, which has really been beneficial for him, especially his relationship, with head coach Ed Orgeron. This is a kid that showed up at 385 pounds. Last year at times was under 360. Well, that's going to make all the difference in the world in terms of how he played. One of the most double-teamed defenders, in college football last year, and still super productive. If he then shows up at the combine after all is said and done and is north, of 370 again, there's a lot of people that worry about what things will look like for him if he doesn't play and is not around, the team in that atmosphere, but that there's a tug of war of the family, the high school coaches, the people that have been around him, and the new people that have showed up because they believe he can be a high draft pick, and I think that that's a very interesting scenario to see how it plays out. You already saw Pharrell, return. They were able to get a transfer kid from the portal from Nicholls State to come in and give them a little more veteran guy, in terms of the secondary, and losing those two guys. But I think it'll be very interesting to see what wins out there on those two sides. And then when we get down the road to the combine, if he sits out, what does he look like and how does it play out? Because he is still only a redshirt sophomore, and there have been times where he has been his own worst enemy, in terms of staying in shape, being motivated, being a self-starter, and things like that. But there's no doubt, that when he is at, 360 or less, he is a big guy that's hard to deal with, and still had 39 tackles, and brought a real physical element, to their run defense. So without him, they're missing out on something in terms of being able to repeat. And without having the team environment and the coaches every day, I think that he is missing out on something as well. So that's an interesting one to look at. The other guy I thought that really jumped out at me last week in that Miami matchup is their tight end has every chance in the world to jump up the draft board if and when he declares. Brevin Jordan is a real dude. And it's all about the receiving part of his game. And when you watch what Waller is out there doing last night, you mentioned the other guys, that we compare a guy like Waller to in the NFL. This kid gives it to you. They're 7 for 120 and a touchdown against Louisville. And it didn't even look like Louisville had defenders that were in the same range, athletically as being able to cover him. So when you see a lot of teams making use of that in the NFL, he could become, I think, a very popular name. And then the funny one was that kind of a reversing course, the University of Miami now not going wide left or wide right, as they were able to steal the FIU kicker who actually hit a game winner against them, now comes and joins them. And he is a Miami kid. He's hit a 50-plus yarder every year, and he tied the record for the longest field goal in the history there at the school. So here's a guy making 50-yarders on a routine. And if he gets a chance to kick some big kicks the rest of the way, in the ACC, he might put himself in kind of late round or PFA consideration. And you see Blankenship won a job. You see Bass won a job in Buffalo. It will not be surprising if this kid is in camp next year challenging for a job.
Borregales. Oh! Hey, this guy's hitting 65, 67 yards during pregame warmups like nothing. So he's clearly on the NFL radar. We show love to kickers too on the state of football. And, you know, you talk about the Revan Jordan. I do worry about his size because last time I checked, he was, I think, 6'2" and 6/8 inches. So, you know, under 6'3", a little bit concerning there. I will say Tyler Shelvin from LSU, Russ, is an intriguing guy because, you know, you think back to the old school days of the Sam Adams, the Gilbert Browns, the Tony Saragusa, but I can't think recent memory, like guys that are north of 350, 360 plus, they just don't seem to make it anymore these days.
Yeah, it's almost impossible because they're really one-down players. Because passing is so prevalent now, you really only use them in definite running situations. So you have to be terrified if this kid doesn't come back this year and he shows up, even if it's 360, how is that going to play when he gets to the combine? Remember, Terrence Cody's probably the most recent guy that was a giant beast, and he couldn't do anything in the NFL, partly because there was no home for him. Secondly, he couldn't stay in shape. So that's what scares you. And the reason I bring it up or wanted to mention it is, a lot of people have always asked me, why do the Alabama guys, why do so many fail? Well, a big part of it is Alabama is so structured that guys can't get out of shape because Saban has so much power there. He can literally change a person's life by not allowing them on the field. Once they get in the NFL and they have $500,000 in the bank, you don't have that control anymore. That's what happened with Trent Richardson. He didn't work as hard. He wasn't going to see the trainers, doing all the little things. His weight got up there. He wasn't the same player he was in college. That's one of the issues you're going to have with a kid like this. If that's his issue, is how is he going to handle when he has the freedom, when he's not being watched 24/7 and having to follow the rules that they do at a lot of these major schools where they control everything you eat, everything you do, all the stuff you do off the field. That changes in the NFL. And trust me, teams are very leery of guys that are constantly battling weight problems that are north of 350. Very few of them make it. It's a real concern amongst NFL teams. So if this kid could do the right thing, get back to school, get that weight down in the 330s, 340s, that'd be the best thing he could ever do for his career. If he's over 350 at the combine, I'd be stunned if he was drafted early.
Yeah, and Daniel McCullers out of Tennessee is a recent guy that comes to mind, and I think he was placed on a practice squad. And I mean, here's a guy who came out 4 or 5 years ago, still can't stick to a 53-man roster. So we'll continue to monitor that. Sticking right there in the state of Louisiana, that running back there, Elijah Mitchell, you know, he was kind of on our radar. We had Raymond Calise out at the NFLPA Collegiate Bowl, and this guy Mitchell, you know, kind of on the back burner. They got a stable of backs down there in Louisiana, but I think the one knock on him was his time speed, you know, 220 plus, you know, kind of a bigger back. I went back and look, we had him kind of guesstimated in that, you know, 4.7, you know, high 4.6 range. But shout out to the recruiting analytics crew because they had him timed at almost 21 miles per hour on that big 59-yard breakaway run. He hit almost 21 miles per hour, which is pretty impressive. So, again, take it for what it's worth. Sometimes the 40-yard dash is not the end-all, be-all because when you see guys on those breakaway runs that can separate, that's invaluable. So, you know, definitely check out Scouting the Nation. That's our new weekly feature on the NFLDraftBible.com. We'll post that every Monday. The rises, the sliders, the surprises. So we're excited about that. The Appalachian State wide receiver, you might want to go check him out after you read about some of the measurables this guy is putting up. And, you know, we mentioned LSU. I still believe, Russ, with or without Tyler Shelvin, I think they're an 18-point favorite against Mississippi State, SEC, kicking off action this week. I mean, I think LSU, regardless, the defending champions are going to go and handle their business here on week 1.
Well, I think there's no question. That's a loaded team. I'd be very, very surprised if they didn't handle their business. I mean, you just saw Ogeron on 60 Minutes. I mean, that team is pumped up and ready to go. I mean, they are – and they're loaded. I mean, just look at the guys. Even if Chase does not come back, which it sounds like he's not going to be returning to play for him, I don't see any way this is a close game. And I really think they could be a dominant team all season.
Hey, Russ, I'm curious to get your opinion. We debated it last week, with the players who did opt out, did sign with an agent. We saw an interesting situation last year with the punter Turk in Arizona State, where he did sign with an agent and was granted his eligibility there. I'm wondering, should the NCAA give these guys a loophole, a pass, or is it like, hey, you knew the consequences, you knew the long-term impact of signing with an agent. These guys that opted out now want back in, but signed with an agent. Fair or unfair to kind of hold them hostage?
Well, I don't even look at it as fair or unfair. I think it is smart or dumb, because if you say no, it once again says basically we're trying to control every single thing and give you very little to a player. So if per se a player now says, do I really want to go deal with that where I have no power, I can't, like anything I do is going to be scrutinized, or do I want to consider the CFL? Do I want to consider the XFL when it returns? I mean, the NCAA needs to start thinking in this century. I mean, they're one of the most poorly run organizations in the country. They need to start being proactive and understand things change. To me, every kid that opted out should have the option of jumping back in. And really, I think what this may lead to is it may lead to the NCAA having to adjust their rules and say, you know what, if a kid wants to come out and after going through the process of coming out, signing with an agent, meeting with a bunch of people, and then determines, you know what, 2 weeks later, I'm out of this, I want to go back. I wouldn't be surprised to see the NCAA tweak some of their rules to find a way to make this work for players in the future. So I'd be very surprised if they really stuck their feet in the ground and said no player that signed with an agent can't return. If they do, to me, that's just short-sighted and stupid.
All right, fair enough. The state of football here, Rick Serritella, John Murphy, Russel Lande, breaking it down. We're going to get into some of these weekend matchups. I'll start off with you, John. Last week we saw our first, ranked versus ranked team in primetime, Miami and Louisville. We've got a couple of matchups like that on the docket today. Of course, SEC kicking off this weekend, Kentucky at Auburn. We've also got Louisville at Pittsburgh, which should be an exciting game. And then, oh, by the way, don't forget, Army is ranked 22nd in the nation, visiting those Cincinnati Bearcats. I got news for you. Talk about Rodney Dangerfield. Army's a 14-point underdog against Cincinnati. I think they might win this game outright. I'm not sure how many NFL draft prospects are on that roster, and I like the quarterback and safety duo there on Cincinnati, but I think they're going to be in for a long Saturday here against these Black Knights.
Yeah, well, I think the other thing is Cincinnati is not a team. They score points, but it's not spectacular high-flying offense, when you look at it at the end of the day, right? They have a real dual-purpose quarterback. That's what he does well. That's the issues he creates, for opposing teams. So it'll be interesting to see if the fact that they practice against a dual-threat quarterback on the regular, can Cincinnati's defense adjust to what Army is doing, because the first couple of weeks that hasn't worked for Army's opponents. So I think it'll be interesting to see, are they able to just kind of tackle their guy, stay in their lane, not over pursue, and not get kind of caught in the windmill that Army has created in the first couple of weeks. Some of the other ones, the LSU game, it also is interesting because it's first game with Mike Leach in the SEC. So it's that spread component with a transfer quarterback, KJ Costello, who could put himself in the mix, in terms of improving his draft grade if he goes down there, plays a full season, plays well for Leach, and puts up some big numbers in that conference. It'll be interesting to see how that, works out. And I think one game that's interesting there is that Auburn-Kentucky, that is all set up for Auburn and Bo Nix. And Kentucky might have something to actually say about it. And we're not talking about college basketball. Kentucky might actually have a say-so, in that side of it. And I think the real interesting part is we saw what happened with Florida, where you had Felipe Franks, and then you kept having Trask. Every time he got in there, he did the right thing. He made plays. You kind of looked at him and you started wondering what it would look like if you ever went to Trask. and we've seen how they've gotten on track, by putting him in there. Well, now you're going to have LSU with Miles Brennan, Alabama with Mac Jones. You're hoping, if you're Auburn, that Bo Nix kind of has gotten over, sort of some of his, passing inadequacies, and gets a little more consistent there with the offense and defensive weapons they have. They could bounce back. But now you go to Georgia, and they thought they had their quarterback, and now they're going to be playing with a different transfer quarterback. The SEC really could be won or lost, or there could be a surprise component of the SEC may end up being who out of these unknown quarterbacks becomes known a month from now. Because you got a lot of unknown quarterback situations throughout the SEC, whereas what's going to, give you the firepower in the Big Ten. And if, in case you thought there may not be any politics to any of this, Nebraska, how many times did you have some interesting things to say about the Big Ten commissioner? Welcome back to college football. You get Ohio State in Ohio State week 1. Good luck with that. Might have wanted to just let Iowa make all that noise, because Nebraska, who thinks they're ready. They do. Behind the scenes, Nebraska thinks they're ready to make a statement. Well, your statement is don't get a 50 ball thrown on you week 1 against Ohio State with all their guys trying to come back. So it'd be real interesting to see how Nebraska shows up to that game, because they do believe. Now, they have done a hell of a job recruiting. If you look behind the scenes, they have out-recruited almost everybody not named Ohio State in the Big Ten.
I don't know. Rutgers has got a pretty good recruiting class there. I think 37.
Yeah. Well, because the University of Schiano will be back in effect very soon. You just got to get your bags packed and get back on the road for them to be successful, because Rutgers was successful when you dominate the East Coast and then you're able to go out and get the guys that Schiano was able to get there from Florida. He was able to recruit guys to Jersey, that normally you only recruit guys like that to Jersey, with an offer they can't refuse, right? Nebraska has done a heck of a job recruiting, but it now has to turn out to be, when you're playing a game like that against Ohio State, it has to be something that we're all coming away from it saying, man, those, like we're doing with the Raiders, right? Like we're doing with, the Raiders right now. You want to come out of that Ohio State game saying, yeah, Ohio State is still what they are. But if you can get that to be a 4-quarter game for Nebraska, you might actually start having people realize you're playing in the Big Ten. Because right now, you're nowhere. No one knows that you're there, and really nobody cares other than Scott Frost that he's back there, coaching at Nebraska, because they've won about as many games as in the Big Ten, as Vanderbilt's going to win in the SEC.
Well, he didn't inherit the greatest situation. And, if Scott Frost was about 25, 30 years younger and taking the field, then they might have a shot. But, Big Ten will be kicking off here shortly. Russ, I'll get over to you here in a second. But the one guy that kind of is intriguing at the very least that John has mentioned, and we talked about him on the Infectious Scouting podcast a little bit, KJ Costello. I mean, you talk about his draft grade is all over the map. Then you inject him in the air raid. Now you inject him in the air raid in the SEC. This can be a complicated evaluation. We saw, Gardner Minshew was a tough eval, and it worked out. Anthony Gordon, tough eval, didn't work out. Thoughts on KJ Costello?
Well, I think physically he's definitely, in my opinion, I think he's better than those guys. I mean, in terms of he's a big, strong-armed kid. And I think it's funny, if you remember, because Minshew did so well when he first got in and everybody was excited about him a year ago, everybody was thinking Gordon was going to be this rock star. They said he's better. He's going to be this unbelievable player. And I think by the end of the year, people are like, the system helps, but you still, decision-making, mental process, it's still important. And I think there was a clear delineation between who was better in most teams' eyes. I think Costello's got a chance to really help himself. He's a very smart kid. He's not a premier athlete, but he's a good athlete with a good arm. I think he's going to really set himself up to be I don't think he's going to be a high pick, but a 3rd to 5th rounder if he plays well. It really shows, because last year there was before the injuries and everything, I thought this kid showed a little bit, but I thought he was more disappointing than he was exciting. And that was sort of the frustrating thing we had talked about a few times, was for a guy with this much talent, we thought this guy was going to be a really good player last year. Didn't come to fruition. There's a lot of inconsistency. He could really benefit also playing for Mike. Mike's as good as you get in terms of teaching the ins and outs of playing the position. This kid's going to really learn about being a quarterback, making reads, going through progressions, doing all those things. All it can do is help his career. I'm excited to watch it.
Yeah, I mean, you can argue that this is the best quarterback that Mike Leach has ever had to work with.
At least from the starting point, no question.
Yeah, and a lot still remains to be seen, but to John's point in the chat room, doesn't turn the ball over a lot. 49 to 18 touchdown to interception ratio. We know coming over from Stanford, he's got the smarts. Who are some of the other guys here or matchups that you're keeping an eye on this weekend, Russell?
For me, I'm really excited sort of SEC, and it's sort of being a pain in the butt, but I want to see some of the better players. I mean, when Tennessee plays South Carolina, I know guards don't get the attention, but when I look at Trey Smith, I see a guy that's sort of like the Nelson kid with the Colts. I think this is a kid, different type of athlete, but he could challenge to be a top 15 pick as a guard, and that's a rare thing. Usually guards start sliding. This kid's a physically dominant kid. If he plays and continues to improve like he did last year, and then the medical checks out when he gets to the combine, because remember in 2018, he missed that season with the blood clots in his lungs. So sort of similar, you wonder if it's going to be like David Andrews, where teams find out, and David Andrews had to miss last year with the Patriots, but he's back. So if teams feel comfortable with what they see at the combine, and this kid plays well this year, and this is sort of the first step in that, I'm excited to watch it. This kid played a ton of snaps. He's a big, powerful, thick-bodied kid. I like this kid a lot. I'm excited to see what he does against South Carolina. And the other thing that I think is funny, and the other matchup I want to see, is Alabama's playing Missouri. For whatever reason, last year you had the 2 elite receivers go in the first round for Alabama. And to me, it was obvious that Devonta Smith is the next great player. But for some reason, now everybody's talking about the younger receiver, Waddle, and they're forgetting about Smith, who I think in at least 2 or 3 games last year was the best receiver on the field for Alabama. And I don't get it, because to me, Smith is a special guy, because I think he combines having the juice that Ruggs does with a little bit more consistency catching the ball than a guy like Judy does. I think he's sort of between the two in terms of talent level. I really think Smith is going to surprise some people. And if they can get over the fact that he is a skinny guy who looks like a toothpick when you see him up close, if they can get over that, I think this guy's got a lot of chances to be a first-round pick. I can't wait to see him play this week, see how he does without those other 2 guys around him taking the attention away.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're clearly in for another, Alabama wide receiver debate leading up to the NFL draft. And, John, I'm curious to get your thoughts on this Tennessee guard, because there's no doubt about it. He's arguably a top 10, top 15 type of talent. But, it's not just one incident with the blood clots and the lungs and everything else. It's multiple incidents.
Yeah.
And, the Blesto and National were also very high on it. One of them, he was the highest graded players. But again, I mean, when you're talking about blood clots in the lungs, I just don't think I'm ever going to be comfortable enough to take a guy like that in the first round. That's just me.
Yeah, I mean, I think it will all come down to what does his physical look like, and what are they able to do, to get people comfortable with it. Is it something that's now under control? Is it something that can be controlled, by Medicaid? And is there anything with playing football and putting, exertion, of yourself when you're doing that as a big guy? Is there any more intended risk in doing it or not doing it? Because that becomes, a factor there, with things. Another one, and it's far less, intrusive in type of the injury. But now you heard Bateman trying to explain sort of his reasoning behind things, and came out and said that, he's had, some trouble, with asthma in the past. Right. And so now having him come out and physically say that, and you have the COVID thing, and we've talked about underlying issues, hey, you're now going to, I think, nitpick, on certain things that may have been more common, or even having the willingness. We've seen some guys, probably Armand Armstead is another guy that, from USC, when he had those issues that, he fought his way back to, getting the play. And then when they showed back up, when he signed with New England, he had to retire early yet again. So I think he's going to get his shot, as long as God, bless that nothing else happens, between now and next year's draft. I believe he will still get his opportunity. It's really going to be decided upon how early, if he has a top 15, definite first round grade, and you knew that he was only going to play a shorter period of time, how much risk reward will there be there to say, hey, I'll take my chances that there aren't guys that'll play that well, even if he only plays, a shorter career than the normal offensive lineman. He's too good to pass up. When is he too good to pass up? What part of the draft is he too good to pass up? Because if it's still the same, and we don't have anything better in terms of, no, don't worry about it, he's now on this medication, there's nothing to fear, well, then he might still be able to go where, his talent projects him. If not, it's going to be very interesting to see, is it a team with these extra picks? Is it somebody that it makes sense because you're saying like, hey, they have 2 1s or they have 2 2s, and they're able to kind of double down, on something like that, because smart teams have made it their business of figuring out how can you get a guy like that a little bit shy of where he goes, and then you double back if you have an extra pick, in the 3rd or 4th round, and you take your 5th or 6th best O-lineman at that spot, and you double it up so that, if something, God forbid, ever keeps him from playing, you have your backup scenario sort of already there. But man, he is a tough kid not to like off of film. And now you're really rooting, for the factor that, this off-field scenario with his medical does not, drag him down too far.
Yeah, and I think, you make a good point. The teams with the draft equity, some of these teams that are loaded with the draft picks, the Dolphins, the Jaguars come to mind. It might make a little bit more sense there. But Trey Smith, no question about the talent, that's for sure. Winding down here on the State of Football. We are a live show each and every weekday, 9 to 10 a.m. Eastern. A little bit of news. I don't know how notable it is, but, John Elway's infatuated with these first-round quarterbacks. Jeff Driscoll, by the way, was the guy I couldn't think of earlier, playing well for the Broncos, surprisingly, Russ. But now they bring in – and, oh, by the way, John's old team, Saskatchewan, putting Paxton Lynch on the neg list, man. And I'll give you a quick Paxton Lynch story. I might have told this on the air, but when I went to go watch him against Temple, and he just literally got his ass beat, I think 7 sacks. He was probably hit about 20 times. And I remember going into the post-game presser where, Samantha and myself were probably the only 2 media in the room. And this guy was just whining like a little brat, pointing fingers at his offensive line, blaming everybody except me. It was everybody else's fault. And he was such a whiny little punk.
That goes over really well with your teammates, right?
Yeah. And I said to myself, how could anybody view this guy as a first-round pick? Now, I don't have a similar story for Blake Bortles, but Denver bringing in Blake Bortles, Russ, maybe as an insurance policy here. Locke, we mentioned, is probably out for at least a month. Smart move, bad move, or waste of time?
Well, I understand the move because the one good thing you're going to get with Blake is he's a veteran. He's going to probably pick up the system quickly. And I think he understands at this point in his career what his role is. He's not the starter. He's the guy to be the mentor, be there in case of emergency. Hey, the reality is Driscoll has not gotten a great chance to show his stuff in regular season games. Well, here's a 4-game stretch or a 3-game stretch. Let's see what you got. Maybe they find out they have a great future, a guy that can be a backup for a decade, be a great clipboard holder, or maybe they get surprised and he plays so well that they can say, you know what, if Locke isn't the guy, we may have our guy right here. So it's not a terrible thing. It's not like anybody thought that team was going to do particularly well this year. And if Locke comes back in a month, you still get the rest of the year for him to develop and show you what he's got. But it gives you a 3 or 4 game glimpse to look at Driscoll, who's got a big arm, who's a way better athlete than people give him credit for. This kid can run. So why not roll him out there, see what he does? He did some good things when he was at the Bengals in training camp. You could see it when he was there 2 or 3 years back. So I think there's something there to peek at. The reality is Denver has not been a good team, in my opinion, for a while. So what's the harm? I mean, Locke to me is still a developing guy. I'm interested to see this, and bringing in Bortles makes a lot of sense to me. If you need a veteran backup, why not?
Yeah, I mean that quarterback position there in Denver has literally been a revolving door since Peyton Manning
left.
Yeah.
You almost have to wonder if Manning doesn't choose to go to Denver when he was a free agent there, is Elway already fired?
I think so.
Oh, I think there's no doubt. Because, I mean, what has he done non-Manning? I mean, it's sort of a disaster.
Well, you'll see over my shoulder. I don't know if you see it or not. I just picked up the book by Jason Cole. Hopefully we can have him on here. You know, people forget he put a decade of time as the Colorado Crush owner / GM and worked his way up to that job. So, you know, he paid his dues to, you know, he paid the cost to be the boss. The other guy on the market, John, in for visits this past week, I'm still scratching my head why the Eagles aren't pulling the trigger here, because he was in to visit with the Giants after the Saquon Barkley injury. Devonta Freeman. I mean, you know, he's visited the Eagles, he's visited the Giants. I know if I'm Devonta Freeman, I'm praying that the Eagles extend that contract offer. But here we are going on to week 3 in the NFL. Devonta Freeman, I think he still has some gas left in the tank, no?
Yeah, the problem is you can't ask for premium when you're probably more, you know, regular. You know, sort of, you know, still asking for $3 or $4 million guaranteed. I think you're kind of barking up the wrong tree there, you know, with that. I think if you looked at either of those O-lines, you're not terribly excited about it. And I think the problem is the better fit would be going to Philadelphia, but you know you're not beating out Miles Sanders in all reality. Now you could go there and be a nice 1-2 punch, you know, with him and get back on the field. And if they get healthy, they're a better football team, you know, but either place you're going, there's not probably a long-term scenario to it. So it makes you wonder if Freeman is part of it's the money, and is part of it Freeman not looking for a one-stop, you know, type opportunity. So I think part of it is he's got to get out of his own way, right? He's already gone through one agent, you know, by not being able to get out of his own way, because you see that role that Carlos Hyde, you know, has in Seattle, you know, and he got that because Freeman wouldn't agree to a deal. You know, so you could have been in a really good spot, you know, that runs the ball and is going to run the ball, and you could have been one injury away from a feature back, you know, in an offense with Russell Wilson. So you outthought yourself in that scenario. There was no plan B. The Dolphins and the Jaguars, when they, you know, moved away from some of their guys, did not go in his direction. So I think now he's kind of caught flat-footed, you know, there where the Panthers know their guys coming back, and they'll just reward Mike Davis and let him have the ball, you know, for a couple of weeks and not do anything outside of that. The guy I would like to see the Panthers give the ball to is Reggie Bonifant. You know, I would like to see what he could do, you know, there. If not, you know, cover Russ's ears and I'll take him in Toronto. You know, but that's another story for another day that doesn't need to be on the air. But I think Devonta Freeman, there's not a perfect scenario, you know, and I'm not sure there will be one, you know, without saying that, you know, somebody's lead back goes down. It's almost like he wants the perfect situation of, I can walk right back in, be the lead back, and possibly be there for more than one season. You know, I think until he gets out of his own way, you know, he's had a really good deal, probably the best one he'll get on the table with Seattle. And now he's got Rosenhaus, you know, who clearly can get, you know, contracts done for guys. But if your own guy won't agree and doesn't kind of see the light of day, you know, of what he's going to have to do, you're kind of stuck. And then the one crazy point on Bortles is we don't realize it because we saw enough in Jacksonville. He's only 28. So the crazy part about Bortles is you're bringing in a guy now who's going to his third team if he signs with one, and didn't really do much of anything, you know, but learn with McVay, Is there anything that he took from that time with the Rams that could alter what we saw in Jacksonville? Right? So is there anything left there where the Paxton Lynch, I mean, you can neg Paxton Lynch, and please, for the love of everybody, bring that guy up and let him play. No one's going to worry about that, right? So the factor that that somebody's negging Paxton Lynch and somebody else is neg listing, another West Coast quarterback who can't play for, what, at all, probably went to UCLA, if you're wondering who that is, so if you want to bring in a guy like Bortles, a combination of what Bortles has done at times and what Driscoll has shown, unfortunately, playing in the worst moments, because the Bengals teams were bad. And then he went to Lions teams that made the Bengals teams look not as bad. So he has played with the worst case scenario. But go back and look, this kid had a hell of a pedigree that got him to Florida and then played well enough at Louisiana Tech to get himself back on the NFL radar. He has a lot of tools that'll be interesting. And I might go the opposite way and say, did the Manning scenario, even though it paid its dividends in terms of you got a ring, you got your championship, and you got your payday, did it not set them back in the bigger picture to say, if they don't ever get Manning, might they be on one of these younger quarterbacks already? Like, in other words, could they be in year 3, 4, 5 of developing whoever they would have gone and drafted if they had not gone in that direction with the Manning scenario? Because
that means they would have had to pick a good quarterback, though.
They did nothing with any of these real quarterbacks while they had Manning, right? So they did nothing in that scenario. So, when you look at it, their quarterback play has been inconsistent at best in this entire period of time. So when you're going back and hoping for the days of Kyle Orton, you know that you're in trouble, right? So when you're looking for consistency and you say potentially over a 2 or 3 year period of time, the most consistent guy might have been a guy like Kyle Orton, you know that it's not just what Elway has done wrong there. They just have not done well, when it comes to evaluating and putting guys into that system, and building around it. But they completely ignored quarterback while Manning was there. And whether that had a lot to do with, you see it happen, right? The Chargers did that. The Cowboys did it when they had Romo. The Giants, forever people kept saying, what about the next guy? What about the next guy? The clubs that pay too much attention, to that noise and don't develop a guy while somebody's there to take the real actual reps, they run into trouble. And you saw it last year with the Steelers. You have nothing there behind Roethlisberger, and when he's out, it played out that you literally didn't have a guy that could complete a forward pass in an NFL game. I don't think you want to go in that direction. So I think the Bortles thing would be interesting in Denver, just to see more of, did he take anything from that time with McVay to where you might see a little bit better player, now, because at only 28, there's still a little bit of chance that there's something there. But I don't mind giving that Driscoll kid a run, with the weapons they have around him. The issue is losing Sutton, who was the cornerstone to why you drafted those other guys.
Yeah. Well,
you're now missing that go-to guy on the outside to give Judy and Hamler when he's back, and Fant, there. Like, you had your mix of all that and two backs, and to lose Locke and Lindsey and Sutton in the first 2 weeks, they're not in a good spot. And like I said, they're in a bad spot because the Chargers are better than they were, the Raiders are better than they were, and the Chiefs aren't going anywhere.
Yeah, and I will say it's an interesting thought process with the Peyton Manning thing, but you know what? At the end of the day, if I'm going to be assured that ring, give me 5 seasons of mediocrity or below, and I'll take that one ring.
If you're John Elway,
Sure. Well, hey,
you ain't getting 5 years of mediocrity if you're Matt Russell.
No doubt about it. Well, listen, we're winding down here. I do want to get to quickly, because the Peyton Manning Denver scenario reminds me of one quick note here, Russ, because had it not been for that Super Bowl, I don't think Adam Gase ever becomes a head coach. And he has failed not in one spot now, but in two locations. And here we are, week 3. The Indianapolis Colts are a double-digit favorite. This game's going to get ugly. So my last question to you here before parting shots is, NFL Week 3, I know my seat is feeling a little bit warm from sitting in it the past hour, but the seat underneath Adam Gase is scorching hot. Matt Patricia just doesn't look like a head coach. Dan Quinn, despite the watermelon roll kick and everything, I still think he could be a good defensive coordinator in this league, but he's on the hot seat too. Is there a chance we see a head coach fired here after this week?
No, I don't think it'll be this soon. I think teams, truthfully, are a little bit hesitant to do anything in season this year. I think they really want to wait till the end of the year. The thing,
even a guy like Greg Williams, who went 6-2 as the interim there in Cleveland, don't you want to find out? Because I think we found out Gase is not the guy. Don't you want to find out if Greg Williams is the guy?
I don't think there's any chance they would name Greg Williams as the head coach there, even if he went 12-0. If he got the team, I think if they blow out Gase, they will find a new guy. I would look down in Baltimore and see maybe their offensive coordinator Roman. Joe Douglas was down there with Greg a little bit. I think that would be a guy to think about as a guy that might come up. But I think you're looking at hot seats. I mean, yeah, Atlanta, it's a shame. I mean, that's a team that's been winning for over a decade now, pretty regularly, not all the time. And things have just sort of gone downhill the last few years. Detroit's sort of a dumpster fire. It makes Coach Caldwell look far superior, looks so much better in most people's eyes, really, that he should maybe be in the discussion to get an opportunity to interview for a head coaching job. The Jets situation is just sort of a disaster. It's really a shame. You hate to see that. I think what's going to be interesting from what I'm hearing is, and John, you could probably attest to this too, I had heard at this year's NFL Combine that the NFL was going to have unbelievable changes amongst GMs and scouts this past offseason that we just went through, but none of it happened because of COVID. Now I'm hearing that instead of waiting till next year in the traditional offseason of the draft, I'm hearing those changes at GM and scouting are going to happen in December, January. So you could see coaches, GMs, and scouts a massive amount of change in December of this year.
That's interesting. As the draft season is
like in full throttle.
Yeah. All right. Well, hey, way to end the show on a high note.
Yes.
All right. Parting shots for the people. Russel Lande, his first Tuesday on board with us full time here throughout the season. He'll be here each and every Tuesday. Again, the State of Football weekdays, 9 to 10 a.m. Eastern. Russ, give the people a parting shot till the next week.
You know, I mean, great being on with you guys again. I would do, a little shout out to Sam. It's just, cut down the caffeine. Just no more caffeine once the show starts. Then we'll be much more calm. And maybe get John a little caffeine, get him buzzing a little bit in the morning. He looks like he's ready to fall asleep down there in New Orleans.
Good stuff. We always appreciate the time. Of course, follow him on Twitter at Russel Lande. You can follow this guy at DraftJM13. John, we'll be back at it again tomorrow. What do you think we will be diving into here on the State of Football?
Well, if you've had enough of Fugazi as your head coach, let me give you one that'll make you less excited. Potentially the hottest offensive coordinator type coach at the end of this season for you wonderful Jet fans could be your favorite and mine, Brian Schottenheimer. So get ready for the factor that
and I will say, I think Brian will be a far better head coach than he ever was a coordinator. I think he will be a great head coach.
Just think about it, is that look at what he's doing, and he's coaching Russell Wilson. They're going to make a deep playoff run, and we know, if we know anything, that the Johnsons are easily influenced by what people think. And so if you're going off of this, he at least ends up potentially being a contender for that job. And you just know what Jet fans would think of that. But it makes sense. Look at what happened with Pete Carroll. You ran him out. He went to New England. It looked like it wasn't, for him. He goes and does something different, comes back to the NFL, and has had a great career since then. We don't even need to go into the Belichick, situation, which was Babe Ruth in reverse, the reverse curse, that occurred there, where the Yankees got Babe Ruth, the Jets lost Belichick to the Patriots, and now all of the sports between those two cities is even, after everything that's gone on there. But how surprising would it be if Brian Schottenheimer, when he left the Jets, did so on a, kind of a interesting incline or decline, and now has double upped, gone to Indianapolis, and now being in Seattle, and they're having success, and a lot of it is starting to be, drawn up in his direction of what he's doing with Russell Wilson with those weapons. If he becomes a guy, how interesting will it be if and would the Jets pull the trigger to go in that direction? And listen, you listen to Russ. Here's a guy with all that pedigree, Marty as his dad, Kurt as his uncle, and if things went full circle, at some point you got to believe at least the Giants have had their run, right? At least there's some good memories in there. The Jets' good memories are all then tied to some of the worst playoff defeats that you've ever seen in your life, right? So, at some point, you'd want to see, can the Jets fall into or find themselves, a credible head coach? Because right now, they may be talent deficit, but the spot that they look like they are in the worst spot is we're seeing what Brian Flores looks like. We see what McDermott looks like, and Belichick isn't going anywhere. And when he does go somewhere, the name of the head coach may still be Belichick the way they're going, right? So if you look at it,
that'll work out well.
Where the Jets are the worst in that division is they may not have a coach on that staff that should be retained. And that's a big problem in a division right now, where if every week in your division you're clearly giving the check mark to the other team, the only week the Jets will have a better coaching staff than their opponent is during the bye.
Well, with that being said, a very interesting note to end on. The state of football, we'll be back at it again tomorrow at 9 a.m. And, John, I will say one thing. Despite the decade of success that Boston has had, they still got quite a ways to go to catch up to that hardware. The Yankees got 27 of those rings. So, still a ways to go to catch up to us here in New York and New Jersey. So with that being said, we'll be back at it again. We thank Russel Lande, John Murphy, Rick Serritella, of course, Samantha, our super producer behind the scenes, brewing all this fresh coffee for us. We'll catch you tomorrow, everybody.